Hello, everyone. We're going to give it a couple more moments for more people to dial in. All right. Good morning, everyone from the Northeastern United States, and welcome to this informational webinar for our online course, Python for Managers with Columbia Business School. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Mark Linehan. I'm a webinar facilitator with Emeritus, and I'm thrilled to be bringing you this informational webinar on this course. So while more people are joining us today, what we would like you to do is I want to draw your attention to the Zoom screen. And on the left-hand side of the bottom, you'll see a box with a Q. We're going to be using that box a little later, but for now, I want to draw your attention to the right side of the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'll see a little chat box. And I want you to open up that chat box for me. And there, I want you to make sure that it is selected to all panelists and attendees. So you'll see there's a little toggle drop-down menu that I want you to check off all panelists and attendees. And there, what we would like you to do is to say where you're dialing in from today. Just say a quick hello. So I'll type in something myself. And after you've said hello and where you're dialing in from today, then after that, if you could tell us, what is it that brought you here today? All right, good morning, New York. South Africa, Toronto. Kansas. Matan's joining us from San Francisco. It's very early there. Wisconsin, China, Louisiana. Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Alabama. Orlando, Florida. Melbourne, Australia, White Plains, New York, Chattanooga, Tennessee. So those of you who are just joining us, we're clicking on the chat box on the lower right-hand side of our Zoom screen, and we're just saying a quick hello and where we're visiting in from. And once you've said where you're dialing in from today, also let us know what it is that brought you here today. All right, and while more people are giving us their answers and while more people are dialing in, again, my name is Mark Linehan. I'm a webinar facilitator with Emeritus, and we are honored to have partnered with Columbia Business School to bring you this course. I'm dialing in from Malden, Massachusetts, which is about 4.5 hours northeast of Columbia Business School. Excellent. Learn more about this course, comparing Python, comparing this course, learn more about the program. Wonderful. All right, excellent. So while you are putting in more of your answers, I will get started with the presentation. So we are thrilled today to have both of our faculty co-directors on the line with us today. So first I want to introduce our first faculty co-director, Mattan Griffel. Mattan is an award-winning adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. He is an adjunct assistant professor of business decision, risk, and operations with Columbia Business School Executive Education. Mattan is a Y Combinator-backed entrepreneur. He co-founded 1 Month, an online lifelong learning management system. And Matan was also selected as one of Forbes's 30 under 30 in education. Matan advises companies on technology and innovation and has worked with Bloomberg, Condé Nast, American Express, New York Stock Exchange, and JP Morgan. And his work has been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, Business Week, and the MIT Technology Review. So good morning, Matan. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Mark.
And we also have on the line Daniel Guetta, our other faculty co-director. He is the Senior Lecturer of Decision Risk and Operations and the Director of the Center for Pricing and Revenue Management and Business Analytics Initiative at Columbia Business School Executive Education. His research focuses on the ways companies can harness the power of data and analytics to drive value. And he teaches classes in business analytics, including data science, pricing, supply chain management, and technical tools such as Python and cloud computing. And he has authored award-winning case studies in this area with a number of companies. And he completed his undergrad in physics and mathematics at Cambridge and MIT and holds a PhD in operations research from the Columbia Business School. So good morning, Daniel.
Good morning.
So what we want to do from here, we want to tell you a little bit about Columbia Business School. Why attend Python for Managers online through Columbia Business School? Well, in short, Columbia Business School is one of the finest business schools in the entire world, priding itself on its excellent faculty who provide their students with superior knowledge and thought leadership across divisions and disciplines. Columbia Business School is over 100 years old, established in 1916 as part of Columbia University. Columbia University, which is, I believe, almost 270 years old. It predates the Declaration of Independence. Columbia Business School is the only Ivy League business school that is located in New York City. And Forbes ranked it the #3 best business school for career prospects just a few years ago. Columbia Business School has over 47,000 alumni in 133 countries. And Columbia University has produced over 100 Nobel Prize winners and many other luminaries, including 3 presidents of the United States. So let's talk a little bit about the program specifics before I hand it over to our incredible faculty. Who is this program for? Now, in short, this program is for professionals in all sorts of industries who are interested in learning practical coding skills that allow them to leverage large data sets in order to make better business decisions. And most importantly, there is no prior experience in programming that is required to take this course. So if you look on the graph on the right-hand side, you'll see that while some people might think that a coding course is only for people going into programming or coding, you'll see in fact that this course is specifically designed for professionals in a wide swath of industries. So whether you're an entrepreneur, a project manager, a management consultant, high-frequency traders, data analysts, analytics managers and VPs, marketing managers, there is a lot to gain from this course, regardless of what your role is within your company or what industry your company is in. We feel that you can gain to benefit a lot from this course. So this is just a small sampling, by the way, of different job titles that you may have where you would be able to benefit from this course. So I want to give you a brief overview of the program. Our 2 incredible faculty are going to be taking each module in more detail, going week by week. But just as a brief overview of what you can take from this course, some key takeaways that you want to have is you're going to start with learning the fundamentals of coding in Python with a focus on practical business applications. So again, this is specifically Python for managers in business. So briefly, in the first few weeks you see there, weeks 1 through 3 is really learning about the fundamentals of Python and learning how to code. You're also going to be able to learn to communicate effectively with programmers, whether you hire, manage, or collaborate with them. So again, this is for professionals. This is not necessarily for people who are professionally going into IT or people who are going to be doing a lot of the coding themselves. This is to help you be able to communicate better with your programmers. If you speak the language of your programmers, you can get better work out of them, and that can make your business all the more productive. This is also going to teach you how to combine multiple data sources for better insights, how to read and write scripts, build the capacity to organize and interpret data that extends far beyond Excel's capabilities. We're going to get a bit more in detail about that when we're talking about each module. And we're also going to be exploring the practical applications of web scraping and APIs. So as you can see on the graph on the right, The first 3 weeks are really dedicated to Python fundamentals. And then the next 5 weeks, weeks 4 through 8, are dedicated to really getting in depth as to how you can apply Python to your business and apply what you have learned so you can really get running right off the bat. So now I would love to hand things over to our first amazing faculty member, Matan. Please take it away.
Sure, thanks, Mark. Okay, so my and Daniel's backgrounds are a little different, and we sort of complement each other quite nicely in creating this class. So my name is Matan. I'm an entrepreneur by trade. I actually don't come from the world of programming. I come from the world of business, and I had to learn about how to program, and I had to learn about Python on my own because I had a startup idea. This is almost about 8 or 9 years ago, and I didn't have the resources to pay someone to build it for me. So I went down the rabbit hole of watching videos online, checking out books, really learning through, frustration, basically, how all this was done. And one of the things that I realized was that a lot of these resources out there are not really made for, somebody who has no background or no experience. You start out with a lot of questions that you want answers to, but these books don't necessarily go into that. They don't talk about the setup process. They don't talk about all the things that could go wrong. And they specifically don't talk about how you apply any of this stuff to solving actual like business problems and how they might come up within, an organization. So as of 4 years ago, actually, I've started teaching 2 courses at Columbia Business School. One is Introduction to Programming Using Python. The other is Introduction to Databases for Business Analytics. They're both elective courses, but they are both, they've both become 2 of the most popular courses in the school, teaching about 200 students each semester for both of those. Again, my background is as an entrepreneur. I founded a company called 1 Month, an online learning platform, and ran that for 5 years. And yeah, that's my interest in teaching coding, is that I've found that it's been incredibly helpful, even from the business perspective. When you're the CEO running a startup, or you're an analyst, or a lot of my students want to go into consulting or work at tech companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, even in what you might consider to be a more traditional business role, where there's marketing or product management. What they've found is that knowing about coding and knowing how to actually code in Python can be helpful, not just when you're talking to developers and interacting with them, which most people are doing more and more, but also it essentially is, it could be more powerful Excel, right? If you're able to open up and just start writing a little bit of code and do the kind of data analysis that somebody who's been working in Excel for 10 years would only dream of being able to do, imagine how that would help you stand out, right, with your boss or as a candidate looking to stand out from the competition in a job. And on top of that, being able to write web scrapers and be able to interact with APIs and pull data from all of these different data sources available on the web, it's really, really powerful. And so I'm excited that you're all interested in checking that out. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, you're still muted, Mark, but I'm guessing
Sorry
you're
about
about
that, Daniel. So let's hand it over to you, Daniel.
All right. I guess you're hopefully handing over to me. Thank you. Thanks, Matan, and hello again, everyone. So as Matan mentioned, my background is a little different, and I think complements Matan. I think a really a great way for the context of this class. I actually started off as a physicist. That was my initial training. Then I was a mathematician. Then I did a PhD in operations research. So all very mathematical stuff. And in fact, in the course of my studies and my PhD and my research, I never actually used Python. I used another programming language some of you may have heard of called R. Doesn't really matter. I also used some C, C++. I was doing a lot of programming, but never really in Python. And then after my studies, I joined a big data consulting company. And in that company, I was incredibly fortunate to see a very, very broad range of industries. I did work at a law firm. I did work at a pharmaceutical company. I did work in consumer financial services. I did work at a company that sort of was one of the biggest non-bank mortgage lenders in the country we were at. So a lot of different companies, a lot of different industries. And my work there was basically to look at the data they had and try to figure out how can we take that data and help them get value out of that data. And so I joined that company, with my academic background and knowing whatever the other languages that I used. And there's one particular story I always like to tell, because this is it was the 3-day period in which I fell in love with Python. It was a Thursday, and the company just told me, well, there's this new client, super important client. We need to get something done for them, and it needs to be done by Monday. This is Thursday morning. They come to me. They say, here's a big data set. You've got to figure out. It was actually a class action lawsuit, but the exact details don't matter. You've got to figure out how to process this data in a way that's going to help them within those few days. And I started using the old tools that I was used to, R, Excel, a little bit of lower level languages, and it just wasn't working, right? On the one hand, it was taking too long to develop in some languages. The code was running too slow in other languages. And so I thought, you know what, let me try and have a look at this Python thing that everyone seems to be sort of talking about, and everyone seems to say is the greatest thing in the world. And so I tried it. And so I went and used Python, and I found that it did the trick. In the time that I sort of, got used to Python, wrote the code in Python and ran the code in it, it was actually faster than any of the other languages I could have used. And so from that day on, I've been a sworn lover of Python. This was at least 5, 6, maybe even 7, I think back years ago. And ever since then, Python has really been the language I've used for all kinds of reasons. We're going to cover a lot more of those reasons in the class itself, but things like speed, things like versatility, things like the fact that it is now one of, if not the most popular language in any kind of environment you'll encounter where people learn how to code. And so I really developed a passion for it, which I'd hope to bring to you in this class. And specifically, I think the one place that, one thing I really try to emphasize in this class is I found that as I was working in these industries with these executives on that data, it wasn't good enough for them to just tell us what they needed, give it to me as the computer scientist, and just let me do the work. That tended not to work. There needed to be communication between the executives and us, the computer scientists, to try and figure out how to get value out of that data. And I found that the most useful executives we worked with were the ones who actually really understood what was going on inside the code. Even if they couldn't code themselves, they understood what we were doing, could work with us, guide us through it, and actually derive value out of that data in conjunction with us. And in some sense, when it comes to my part of the class, and we're going to talk more about the different different modules, different weeks in a minute, but my part of the class is going to try and impart you with the knowledge you need to do that. You're going to be working with computer scientists, with coders, with data scientists at various points in your company, in your career, even if not now, perhaps in the future. I want to sort of teach you what you need to know to understand how they think. And of course, there's an additional benefit to that, which is that, as Matan said, sometimes you won't be working with these computer scientists. You will just have a big data set, and you're going to want to figure out, what do I do with this data set? I've got to answer an important question, right? I need to know which of my stores is most successful, whatever it might be. We're going to teach you how to do that in this class. And that's kind of what I'm very excited to teach you about. And one thing I should point out is, and we'll come back to this quite a bit, I think, during the rest of this presentation, one thing that I'm very proud of in this class that I think distinguishes it from other classes you might have found online. I'm sure during your research, you'll have found that we are not the only Python class out there on the internet. I think that's a pretty fair statement to say. It's in fact twofold. The first is the fact that Matan, who teaches the first half of the class, is, as far as I've seen, and I've seen many, many online Python classes, one of the most exceptional teachers and pedagogues of Python for people who've never seen it before, right? You're going to go from literally never having touched a line of code to really understanding the basics of Python, the main commands, etc. And Matan is really, really good at doing that. A lot of people say they're good at doing that, but then you go through and you're like, oh my goodness, what is going on? It's going too fast. You're not going to feel that way with Matan. And then the second part that I think distinguishes us from other classes is when you get to my part, we're not just going to be saying, well, here's what you need to do, here's a line of Python, here's sort of, what this line does, and then leave you there. We're actually going to cover all these lines of Python in the context of a real case study. So we're going to actually cover a case study about a restaurant chain in New York City, a restaurant chain called Dig or Dig In. If you're in New York City, you'd probably know about them. We're going to look at some simulate. Oh, look at that, Mark, queuing up the slide right on point. And also, I'll say more about that in a second, but in some sense, we will use sort of simulated data from that chain, and we're actually going to learn Python in the context of those business problems. So I'm not just going to tell you, oh, here's a command in Python, and here's what it does. I'm going to tell you, as a manager at this company, you are worried about which of your stores are performing best, or which of your stores are performing worse. How would you then figure out how to translate that question into Python and implement it on this data set, which, by the way, is way too big to open in Excel. And I think that's one thing that, really excites me about this class, and one of the things I really wanted to imbue in it when we created it. And so just to close off this slide, to talk a little more about the case study. So Dig In is indeed the restaurant group that we decided to write a case study with. They were very helpful in sort of talking to me, and I had a number of extensive interviews to find out about the kind of data challenges they faced. The data we're going to use is simulated data that is made to mimic Dig In's data, and it has over 2.5 million rows of data when it comes to orders. This is not something you could even open in Excel, let alone actually do work with or process in Excel. And we're going to be asking a number of questions on this data. How should you evaluate the stores? Which stores are top performers? Is there anything you can do to improve your weaker restaurants? How can you calculate the ROI of maybe certain events or certain initiatives you've done? And hopefully, as you're listening to all these sort of cases I'm talking about, there's already questions popping in your mind as to maybe how that might apply to your business. That might apply to the data you see. And indeed, that is the hope that by the end of this class, you can translate some of the things we've done in this particular business to your business. I'll hand it back over to you, Mark, I believe, right? Or is it?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's Matan. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up here. So I'll talk about the first 3 weeks or so and what is involved in the Python fundamentals, or as I like to think of it, as the Python bootcamp. And the goal here, really, like when you're learning any language, like French, Spanish, or English, you have to learn a little bit about the grammar, and these are the tools, the building blocks that you use to construct sentences and actually convey a message. But at the end of the day, it's not just for the sake of learning a language, right? We want to tie that into what your actual goal is, whether it's being able to be conversationally fluent or read newspaper articles or write stories. And coding is the same way. So there's a little bit of the upfront, how does Python work and what are the building blocks, but we want to get as quickly as possible into how can you use it to solve real problems, because that's what's going to make it interesting anyway, and that's going to spark your curiosity to continue exploring and want to learn more about it. So when we get started, there's a little bit about Python, where it comes from, why, you might be wondering why it's the de facto language for data science and the data analysis community, and why it's the fastest growing programming language that exists right now. And it's the #1 most in-demand language if you're looking at companies that are hiring and what they're looking for. So we'll get into that a little bit, and we'll talk about the business case and applications and dive deeper than we are on this webinar, obviously. But then we're going to pretty quickly get into the important stuff. And one of the hardest parts is actually setting up your development environment, typically when you're coding. And that's true, by the way, even if you're not a beginner. A lot of my friends who are professional developers and join various organizations might take several days to even get the right software installed on their computers so that they can pick up where the rest of the team is working on. And the nice thing about what we've put together is we've made it pretty easy, step-by-step. It's very hard to mess it up, and it should take less than an hour in most cases to get Python installed. And single click installer. And then if you are running into any problems, and this is where this course is an incredible resource, there are people that you can talk to that can actually help you troubleshoot it. So if you could rest assured in knowing that what's typically one of the most frustrating parts of the experience is actually easy, and we can breeze through it and then just immediately get started with the actual Python material, which should be on the next slide. So we start out with the basics of Python, right? As I mentioned, reviewing the purpose of Python and the evolution, understanding what the development environment is. There's a lot of specialized language that you find is used when you're learning about programming. And even some of the terms here on this page, things like the command line, like what are all those things? And when I was first learning how to code, that was one of the frustrating things, was people would throw around these terms without ever defining it. So we're gonna explain in simple terms what all these things are. And then I'm gonna show you the command line is basically where you run Python code. It's a place on your computer that you can, there's a few commands. There's actually hundreds of commands, but we're gonna show you the 4 or 5 most important ones that you need, and basically tell your computer to do some more advanced stuff, such as running code. It turns out every computer actually comes with one. You just have never seen it, most likely, or had no reason to. And as soon as we get into that, we're actually going to be able to start running Python code. So we're going to practice right out of the gate in week 1. I'm going to send over a basic Python script. We're going to run it. We're going to analyze the code. It's not very complicated, but it produces some pretty interesting results. And then we're going to dive into immediately tweaking it. So we're not just starting with, the simple print statement, although it comes to that pretty shortly afterwards. We're actually looking at code within the context of a larger sort of working thing that produces a certain kind of result. And then in week 2, we're going to continue building. So in that week 1, we're going to be actually looking at code, making some changes, sort of fixing it, debugging it. We're going to learn about the basics of Python, variables, text, numbers, math, how you do all those things. And then in week 2, we're going to build on that with some more intermediate to advanced stuff, using if statements to add some choices into your Python code, if you will. We're going to talk a little bit about logic. You don't have to be very, science-oriented, by the way, to be a good coder. I think a lot of people think of programming or coding as, being purely logic. That's not really true these days. There's a lot of tools that are available out there, and we'll be pointing you towards, what are these third-party plugins you can use and tap into. But a little bit of logic is helpful. We're going to talk about lists, loops, and then using those things each week as the toolkit grows, we're going to be able to build more and more complex scripts to do more and more interesting things. In week 3, we're going to sort of get to the pinnacle of the Python bootcamp. So we'll talk about refactoring code for efficiency and simplicity. I'm going to introduce dictionaries and functions. And by that point, we'll have used a lot of functions, but you'll actually then learn how to create your own functions to do even more powerful things. And then finally, importing, which is basically how in Python you can expand the functionality of Python from what it was originally built to be able to do all sorts of other things that the creators never even intended, such as maybe working with Google Spreadsheets, getting live weather updates, and all sorts of other things that Daniel's then going to introduce in the second half of the course. So I think I'll pass it over to you there.
All right, then we move to week 4, and I got to tell you, the switch from week 3 to week 4, I almost like to think of as, interestingly enough, learning a programming language there's surprising similarities to what it's like to learn an actual human language. There's a lot of sort of things to translate, and the way I like to think about it is weeks 1 to 3 are sort of, your classroom time where you learn about the grammar and everything. Week 4, we throw you out into the world in Spain or, I don't know, China, or whatever language you're learning, and we expect you to do stuff, right? So week 4 is when you actually start going out there and figuring out, well, how are we actually going to take everything we've learned and do something with it. And generally, when it comes to programming, what does doing something with it mean? Well, it could mean trying to analyze data sets, right? That's going to be sort of a big part of the focus of the second half of the course. And to be clear, it's not going to be the only focus. We're also going to look at other applications like scraping, which I'll get to in a minute. But a big focus of what we're going to do, given that this is Python for managers, is going to be to try and analyze some sort of business data set. And so week 4 is kind of when we introduce that first sort of look at what it means to analyze a data set. We're going to say, well, how can you actually read data into Python, right? If all you've seen is Excel so far, when I say something like read data, you might think, well, I just double click on the file and open it up in Excel, right? That's what reading data means. Guess what? In Python, it means something slightly different. You have to tell Python, hey, here's my data. I want to do something with it. How do I bring it in? So that's kind of what the first part of that week is going to be. We're going to talk about introduction to data in Python. We're going to talk about a library called Pandas, one of the most powerful data processing libraries in Python. And indeed, anyone who does data in Python will typically be using Pandas. And then we'll look at how data actually looks like in Python itself. Once we've told Python we actually want to use it. And let me ask you to go to the next slide, Mark. Wonderful. So week 5 is in some ways a continuation of week 4. In week 4, we've introduced data in Python. We've seen what it looks like. And by the way, in week 4, the end of week 4, the assignment you'll have at the end of week 4 is already going to be asking you to solve some business problems. So the assignment is no longer going to be write this line of code. The assignment is going to be you're an employee at Digin. You are worried that this store isn't doing so well. look at the data and figure out what you can do, right? It's that kind of assignment we're already introducing, rather than just a more theoretical, well, here's some code, do something with it, which again, I hate to harp on this, but if you look at a lot of other Python classes you see out there, they definitely don't have that kind of business connection. It's much more about, well, do this in Python in some sense. So in week 5, we're going to be talking about filtering data, editing data frames. We're going to talk about something called data hygiene. For anyone who's worked with data before, you know that in theory, data is all wonderful. As soon as you get it, it's dirty. There's some primary keys that are missing. If you don't know what that means, we'll cover that in the class. But sometimes data can go slightly awry. It's, the data doesn't look exactly like you expect it to. So we're going to have a look at those topics here. Next, we're going to talk about combining data. So suppose you have 2 data sets and you want to bring them together. By the way, that's almost impossible to do in Excel, right? The really state-of-the-art way to combine data sets in Excel is maybe using VLOOKUPs. Later versions of Excel have a few other functionalities, but it really isn't very robust. In Python, it's very, very simple to combine data sets together. And finally, we'll cap off week 5 by constructing a more complete order data set for the dig-in case. Next slide, Mark. Week 6, Matan will actually take back over. So we keep you on your toes by switching back and forth. So I'll let Matan cover this slide.
That's right. So then we get into working with APIs and doing web scraping with Python. 2 topics that I find to be quite fascinating. And I wasn't even really aware of when I was first starting to learn how to code. I sort of had this nebulous idea of, okay, this will be useful. I'm not exactly sure why. And I think that, when you're first getting started, that's sort of how you have to approach it. But one thing you learn very quickly is that, first of all, there's a whole wide world of not just data, but also these services that are available. We're familiar with many of them because we use them every day when we go to facebook.com or twitter.com, or we go to dark sky to check the weather. It's one of my favorite weather forecasting websites because it's got really cool charts and granular data of exactly when it's supposed to rain within the next hour and things like that. And through these things called APIs, which stand for Application Programming Interfaces, we can actually use Python code to interact with these third-party services, meaning you can write Python code that will automatically go and pull data, like tremendous amounts of data that is available essentially for free out there on the web. You can also use Python code to do things like tweet automatically, right? If you've ever seen a Twitter bot, for example, you can actually write something like that in Python code, or literally interact with these thousands of different services that exist online. And once you learn how to do it with one of them, the whole world of possibilities opens up for you. So we're introducing using Python with APIs within the context of this case study and data analysis, but the learnings that you'll take from that will allow you to then be able to do other things that you never even thought would be possible. And then we're also going to get into a second sort of related topic, but also quite powerful, which is web scraping. So not just can you interact with these third-party services that have APIs, but you can use Python to go to a website as if you were, just a regular user browsing a website, but also start to scrape the data, meaning take the data and pull it down into Excel sheets or CSV files, or in some way store it and then analyze it. If you've ever had a task or a project where you had to keep track of, say, certain prices as they were updating. If you've ever thought, man, it'd be useful to be able to track product prices on Amazon, right? So you can see how a basket of 10 products prices are changing, or airline tickets, or treasury yields, or any of these things. You can actually write Python code that goes and does it for you, whether it's every morning, whether it's every 5 minutes, every second. That's the power of being able to write Python code, is that once you've written this thing, you can just sort of set it and forget it, and it's running on your behalf in the background. So we'll be introducing those 2 pretty key skills in week 6, and then Daniel will talk about how we're applying it within the context of the case study.
Wonderful. So week 7 will basically be a continuation of week 6. In week 6, Matan will introduce you to all the sort of basics and fundamentals of these topics. In week 7, we're actually going to be putting them into practice. And, you'll also be putting them into practice in week 6. We're not, Matan and I both share a healthy skepticism for theory and a love for practice. So you'll get practice throughout the class. But week 7, we'll be applying these concepts specifically to the dig-in case study, this case study that overarches our entire class. We're going to be looking at the menu for this restaurant chain, the dig-in menu online, and scraping it into Python, and then combining it with the data we already have. And I just can't overstate how important, how useful, and how powerful that kind of analytics can be. The idea that you can take data that you have, combine it with data that's publicly available online, put them together, and conclude some things from it, that is a very, very powerful paradigm. Similarly, we're going to apply the concept of APIs, which Matan also would have introduced you to the dig-in case. Specifically, what we're going to do is we're going to use a website called Dark Sky that is a weather forecasting website. And we're going to use Dark Sky's API to bring in historical weather data in New York City into Python. And then we're going to start asking questions like, well, do I sell more items in my restaurant when it's warm, when it's cold, when it's, you know, how does the weather actually affect my sales patterns? And again, that can be, we'll see there's some pretty useful insights. And again, this is something that you might encounter at your company where you might wonder how the weather or how stock prices or how the news or how some fact out there is affecting your business operations, but you don't have data about these things. Well, guess what? We will see how APIs can be used to bring in that data into Python. Finally, at the end of week 7, we'll do an introduction to aggregating data. By aggregating, I mean doing things like averages, but are far more complicated than averages. So suppose I want to find the average sales per store that was in the upper half of Manhattan early in the morning, right? Much more complex kind of averages and aggregation. We'll see how to answer those kinds of more complex questions. And finally, on week 8, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, wonderful. Week 8 is kind of going to be our capstone. Is going to be the last week in the class, where we're going to really take everything we've learned about data and we're going to bring it together by answering some pretty complex questions in Python. The first part of the week is going to be advanced data aggregation, so more about aggregation, but then the majority of the rest of the week is just going to be practice. I'm going to give you, I think it's something like 6 or 7 questions, each of them an increasing level of difficulty, and you'll actually get to solve those questions and work on those questions in Python using everything you learned. And this seems like a good place to mention that, you know, because we wanted to make sure we gave you good value for your money, this class can really be taken at a number of levels. If all you want to do is be able to communicate and talk to people in your organization to do data, you can do this class in the way that you just listen to us go through the videos, try some of the code that we've listed, figure it out, you know, see if you can get a feel for what that code means, but that's about it. If on the other hand, you want to be someone that does the data analysis yourself, there will be enough questions that are pretty difficult in those weeks. And you can really sort of, you know, get practice there in terms of actually trying them out and figuring out what it's like to do some more complex data analysis. So it's really pitched at a pretty broad range, and you get to decide exactly what you want to get out of the course, depending on what you need in terms of where your career is right now. And that brings us to the end of the class.
Daniel, Matan, thank you so much for that presentation. So my friends, my future students, I'm sure you have lots of questions for Matan and Daniel. So in a little bit, we're actually going to be having a Q&A with Matan and Daniel to answer all your questions you have about this course. So I want to draw your attention again to the bottom left-hand side of your Zoom screen. Put in all your questions. Click on that box that has the Q in the box and put all your questions in there. We're going to have a Q&A in just a few moments. But before we get to the Q&A, I just want to tack on in the end, I really can't compare to Matan and Daniel in terms of expertise or the amazing class that they have created together. But just punching a few highlights for you as to why you should choose this course. So the highlights of this course, not only are you going to get this in-depth course on Python for managers, but also some of the highlights of this course is you're going to have tutorials to set up a development environment. So you're not going to be left on your own. You're not going to be stranded in setting up the development environment. You're going to be guided along. You're going to have real world questions on real world applications, just like Daniel talked about. This is about applying this, like theory is great, but this is about applying these skills and applying Python to your business. You're going to be working with an actual API. We have a case study with simulated data from New York Restaurant Group that Daniel talked about. So again, real world applications for using Python. The other great thing about this is we also have bite-sized learning. So even though the course, it's going to take about 6 to 8 hours a week of content as you go through this course, but it's been broken down into small bites. So it's not just about the flexibility of when you can be online. You can also be watching some of our shorter videos while you're commuting on the train, when you are on a break. So no matter what industry you work in, no matter what your schedule is, we have broken down this course so that those 6 to 8 hours really can fit within anyone's schedule. We also have a dedicated program support team and course leaders that are going to be working as TAs for you during this course. And they will have office hours during the course, and they will be able to help you out. And so you will never be stranded. We're not just going to throw a bunch of coursework at you and then abandon you. You are going to feel supported the entire way. There's also a mobile learning app, again, so that you can even better be learning this on the road. So if you want to be doing some of your coursework when you're commuting on the train, or when you have a break at work, you don't always need to be tied to a desktop or a laptop. You can be doing some of this work on your phone. And also the peer learning and feedback. One of the things we're really proud about here at Emeritus is that we are proud of our international cohort that take all of these courses. So when you are taking Python for Managers, you're going to be taking it with people from many different industries, coming from many different countries, and you're going to be able to learn from your peers, and you're going to be interacting a lot with your peers. It'll really feel like you are a classroom, that you are a body of students. And so you and your fellow students are going to be learning from each other as you go through the coursework together. Now, at the end of this program, once you have successfully completed Python for Managers Online, you're going to receive a certificate of participation from Columbia Business School Executive Education. And this is a digital certificate that you can put on your LinkedIn, you can put on your resume, and this will allow you to tell your current employer and also maybe future employers of the skills that you have learned with this course. So you will be able to use this to market yourself better and to let people know that these are skills that you have as a manager, as a professional, that you have this fluency with Python. So now, what's the next step? So this course starts on February 26th. That is only 2 weeks from today. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, that's 2 weeks, I can put it off, I can do this later. All of us who are working, all of us have lives. 2 weeks can fly by in the blink of an eye. So I encourage you right now, our program support team is going to be putting this link up in the chat box to apply for this course. emeritus.gsb.columbia.edu/Python for Managers/apply.php. That link is going to be appearing in the chat box. Please go ahead and click on that link. Register for this course, or you can click on the link. If you don't have a program advisor yet, click on that link and get yourself hooked up with a program advisor. We think that this course is an excellent course. No matter what business or industry you're working in, this is a great course for you. So go ahead and click on that link and register. And some of you have already been putting in questions for Daniel and Matan, so I don't want to put this off any longer, friends. Let's get started with our Q&A. So let's open this up right here. Oh, my Q&A is bouncing around.
Do you want me to?
Okay, so very quickly, explaining the relationship between Emeritus and Columbia. So Emeritus and Columbia, they partnered to bring this course, and Emeritus, Daniel wants to answer this question live. I was more than happy to do that.
I don't. I was just clicking the button because I.
Oh, okay. I was like, oh, by all means, take it away.
Daniel is just getting used to the Zoom platform. That's what's happening. But go on.
I see. No, yeah, I defer to both of your geniuses over mine. So Emeritus helps schools like Columbia Business School develop the platforms in order to bring this content online. So Emeritus partners with different schools in order to, so the schools develop the content. These are the schools' courses, but then Emeritus helps develop the courses into a packageable course that can be brought to you online. So Emeritus is the vehicle who is very proud to be partnering with Columbia Business School to be bringing you this content, and we are very proud of our association with Columbia Business School.
one thing I should add is I can't talk for every class, but this one specifically that we taught, and Matan can confirm this, you are getting what the MBA students at Columbia Business School are getting and more. We didn't remove anything from the class. We didn't sort of, in some ways, this class is even more extensive than what we actually teach on campus. Is that fair, Matan, I think?
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially a combination of two classes.
That's right. That's right. So you're really getting, what we teach here on campus at Columbia.
And in the convenience of your own home. So we have a question from Raphael regarding data storage. Does the course teach how to interact with MySQL?
It does not. So I do teach SQL or SQL, which is a database language in my databases course at Columbia. In this course, we focus on mostly analyzing the data. We do talk about a few different ways that data are stored, but not specifically MySQL and not specifically accessing SQL databases. I don't know if you want to speak more to that, Daniel.
Yeah, the best way to think about this is, there are multiple ways to access data, many popular ones. I would say the two main methods are, that's not true, I'm not going to restrict it to two, but SQL is a very important way to look at and access data. Typically, though, SQL is done to sort of access the data itself before you do the analysis. We're going to focus more on the analysis part, and that happens in Pandas and Python. I will say that there is nothing you can do with SQL that you cannot do with Pandas. So Pandas, in some ways, a more powerful kind of language in terms of the ability it has to do things. The benefit of SQL is that sometimes there are data sets that are too large even for Pandas, right? They're too large for Excel, too large for Pandas, and so then you have to move to something like SQL, and we're not really going to look to a data set with scale of that kind. The last thing I will say, though, is that after you've gone through this class and you've learned how to deal with data in Pandas and Python, learning SQL will be at least 10 times easier than it would have been if you start from scratch, because you're going to have a lot of the sort of, your mind is going to start working with, start thinking in the direction of data, start thinking of how you actually answer questions with data. And at the end of the day, SQL is just another programming language, much like Python is. And so it'll certainly get you to a good place, but we won't touch on that at all in this class.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. So a couple of coding questions here. So the first one, in your experience with time series data, what is the simplest way to use a single metric for summarizing a 5-number summary?
Good question. And I think I'm really glad you asked it, because I think this really highlights one of the things that we specifically want to do in this class. See, a lot of places you'll go online and you'll see this and there'll be an answer. What is the best way? It'll be a mean, a median, a standard deviation. What I'm going to tell you is this question makes no sense without context. What are those 5 numbers? What are you trying to do with them? What does your boss care about? Is your company doing well? Is it doing badly? You can't answer questions about data analysis without fully understanding the business context in which they're asked. And that's what we'll do in this class. So, I can think of 5 different answers to the summary of 5 numbers. I mean, an average would be the first thing I would go for. That tends to be a pretty good place to begin, but it might not be right in your case. Let me give you an example. Suppose, these 5 numbers are how the revenues of your 5 restaurants over the last year. Then maybe what you care about is not the average, but you care about what is the worst one, the minimum, or you care about what is the best one, the maximum, right? There are all kinds of ways to summarize those 5 numbers. So there's no simple answer to your question, but I think you'll be in a better place after taking the class to actually be able to answer questions like this.
That's excellent.
Oh, I see. Well, sorry, I didn't see your follow-up. I mean, it sounds like you clearly know a lot of what you're talking about when it comes to statistics. But again, I would say that the business case would make a big difference to the answer to that question.
So while we're waiting for more questions to come in, Daniel and Matan, I actually would like if you could possibly expand on that a little bit. Talk about how we're getting like a lot of coding questions, but like talk about the relationship to businesses and how especially how this course applies to many different industries, and not just, even though we're using the example of the restaurant group in the course, but how does this course like really apply across industries?
No, absolutely. I mean, the first thing I should say is we use the restaurant group, but part of the reason that I chose to write this case study. Oh, I see some questions in the chat, so make sure you post them in the Q&A while I'm answering this.
Oh, yes,
So
absolutely. Make sure you're posting in the Q&A, please. Yes, thank you.
So the reason I picked the restaurant group is I think it illustrates a very broad range of the kind of data analytics you might want to do. I mean, the other obvious place where data analytics and automation is extremely useful is finance generally, whether it be looking at stock market data, whether it be at accounting data. The problem I find with those cases specific is not a problem, but they are very specific. They only cover sort of one kind of data analytics. The restaurant chain covers a much broader kind of data questions, including those you might certainly encounter in finance. So I think there is sort of a broad range of industries where this could be applicable. And if any of you are interested in posting the industry you're in the Q&A or in the Q&A, we're happy to sort of address that specifically. But I do think it'll be pretty broadly applicable. And I think Matan, you could maybe talk a little bit about how automation can be useful as well as just data analytics, because that applies everywhere as well.
Absolutely. So one of the things I find is that if you're just learning about programming or technology within the context of, okay, here's a skill set, even people getting like computer science degrees, one of the things you tend to miss out on is, the knowledge of how do you apply it and in what context do you apply it and for what purpose and what reason, right? So it's not enough to just go to a company and to say, okay, I can do this, this, and this, if you're not sure when you should be applying those things or how to think about it, right? So that's actually why I end up having in my courses a lot of people with technical backgrounds who are saying, okay, I spent 4 or 5 years studying this stuff. I know how to do it, but I don't know anything about business. And so, I find myself like, I need to understand the full context. And that's really where the value comes from, is marrying these two together, is to know, not just dive in immediately and just start trying out all sorts of things, but to think properly about what questions you're trying to answer, because it saves you time and it's what actually allows you to help steer your organization. And yeah, so especially, in my portion, in the beginnings of Python, and also talking about APIs and web scraping, we'll talk about, and at various points along the way, we'll say, okay, so we've seen now, for example, how you can write a function, and then how you might realize that, okay, I can clean up this function, or I can make it somehow, simpler, better, easier to read, easier to understand, what's called refactoring, which is, changing the way code looks and is organized without changing how it works. And then we're going to pause and we're going to actually talk about, well, what is the business implication of this? Because, for example, a lot of just business people at an organization don't think about this concept called technical debt, right? Which is where, as you develop your product, it accumulates technical debt. There's all these things which were done, quickly, or maybe you didn't think forward as to how you'd have to write the code for it to be flexible, or maybe the needs of your organization are changing, right? And so you have to then go back and reevaluate, like, okay, what kind of flexibility do I have to build in? But if you're not actually thinking about that, and you're not thinking about refactoring and actually spending time to do that, your organization can essentially slow down to a crawl, right? And this happened with some early, technology companies, which then sort of essentially were not able to innovate, were not able to iterate on their products. And as a result, ended up losing significant amount of market share for quite a while before they were able to figure it out. So, even as someone in like a business leadership position or at an organization, you're going to have to make decisions that involve technology, whether it's how should you be building your product and how should you be thinking about things like technical debt and, tracking, tracking the velocity or the speed of how your developers are moving, the quality of code, what tools and products you should be using, what kind of things that are available out there you should be considering as part of your organization's operational flow. And these are things that are not covered by a typical coding class that isn't inside of a business school, or that isn't this particular lesson. So I think that's where marrying these skills with how do you actually think about it within the larger context of running a business and staying innovative, I think that's where this class really stands out.
Awesome. Thank you, Matan. I'm going to quickly answer this question here. Can I share my data set for system performance in the business context with a mentor in this course for this guidance, i.e. how to go about thinking? So Matan and Daniel have developed the course, and you're going to have course leaders throughout the course. So we're going to have office hours that you can bounce your thinking off of. But also, one of the things that we're really proud of with this course is that we worked very hard to develop an international cohort that crosses work experiences, ages, geographies, and industries. So whereas other online courses, they just throw a bunch of stuff at you and it's a bunch of people who happen to all be taking the course at the same time. We work very hard to replicate that classroom environment in an online environment. So you're going to be able to have a lot of peer feedback and learning. So you might find multiple mentors taking the course with you. We have people who take this course who have less than 5 years of work experience. We have people who have more than 25 years of work experience taking this course. So you're going to be able to bounce your ideas off of all the people who are also taking this course as well. So it's not just a top-down form of learning. You're going to be learning from the entire cohort together, and they're going to be bringing that diversity of geographies and industries and ages and opinions. You're going to be combining all those ideas together. You're going to be learning together, but you're also going to be teaching each other together. So that is another one of the strengths of this course, is that you're going to have no shortage of potential mentors and potential people to bounce ideas off of. So very quickly, we have about 5 minutes left. I want to get to these last two questions. If you have any more questions, please put them in the Q&A box now. Matan and Daniel, we talked a little bit about the restaurant group. We talked about the applying the weather site to that information. But do you have any other examples of problem sets or assignments or projects that you can talk about here that are given during the course?
Matan, why don't you give one of yours? I'll give one of mine.
Sure. The first 3 weeks are basically practicing some of these new things, these new skills and concepts that you're learning, especially when you're first starting out. You know, I throw a bunch of new concepts at you. You need to get a little bit of repetition in there. So the first 3 assignments are essentially, 8 prompts every week. It should take anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half or so. That's typically what I hear. People tend to appreciate it a lot because it's, can we learn about dictionaries this week, apply the concept of a dictionary for solving this problem. And in going back, you'll get a little bit of actual repetition and practice doing it, and you'll be able to figure out if you really understood the concept or not. But it's not until, after those 3 weeks that we start to have some assignments around actually applying the concepts to a specific business case.
So I'll give you a few examples of my assignments. One is to figure out which restaurant in the Dig-In chain has most delivery orders compared to other restaurants that have mostly in-store orders, to try and figure out which restaurant you should hire more delivery people at, which restaurant you should invest in more in that direction. So that's just one example, but that's a small part of an assignment. That, every week there's going to be a bunch of questions like that, and we'll expect you, we will guide you through the process of answering those questions using the data.
And then related to the APIs and web scraping, I think there's an assignment on find an API that, of the list, and you can go explore on your own and write Python code that interacts with it, and also go scrape a website and test it out on your own.
And then there's a question about the IDE and the environment. So just quickly, we're going to be using the first part of the course that Matan is covering is going to be in the command line. Second part of the course that I'm covering is going to be in a tool called Jupyter Notebook, which is a very, very standard tool people use to work with data in Python. But we'll introduce you to all those tools during the class. We're not going to be using a cloud-based environment just because we want to focus really on Python and on learning the language.
Yeah, and so to address Hyler's part of that question, we specifically decided not to use like a very, opinionated tool like a cloud-based environment like a Cloud9 or even Spider, because even though those tools may have some additional features, some sort of conveniences that you might not get from just using a text editor or just using Jupyter Notebook, there's no guarantee that when you join a particular organization that you actually have access to those tools, that those tools are available. So we find that it's actually helpful to just, learn the coding part of stuff, because then no matter where you are, you can pretty easily apply that to, if your organization happens to be using a cloud-based environment, or, you need to use an IDE, that's not going to be complicated. But if we teach it to you, using only an IDE, then if you have to do it without that, you're going to kind of be pretty lost.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We're just about at 10 o'clock. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Matan Griffel and Daniel Guetta so much for joining us here today. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for bringing us this course, and thank you for being online and dialing in and telling us more about it today. Thank you, gentlemen, so much.
Sure. Happy to.
Of course, thank you. And great to meet you all.
And so, friends, one last time, make sure you click on that link in the chat box, enroll for this course. It starts in 2 weeks, and those 2 weeks will fly by. So don't miss this opportunity to take this wonderful course. Click on that link. And if you have any additional questions, you can send them to columbia@emeritus.org. If you have any further questions about the course, we'd be happy to get back to you. Thank you so much for joining us for this informational webinar. Go ahead and click on that link, and we'll see you in class. Thank you for joining us, everyone.